Welcome to the Scrum Sessions Podcast. I am Keel, as always, here with Girion.
Hi, everyone. My name is Garion, and we are really happy to bring you this first episode of the Scrum Session Podcast. And we have a real banger for you because we have Dr. Jeff Sutherland, co-inventor of Scrum and inventor of Scrum at Scale, in our very first episode. And we actually decided to split it up because it was so good and there was so much good stuff that you're going to enjoy the first episode now. And the next one will come out soon on any platform that you use to consume your podcast.
Thank you, Girion. And let's go to Dr. Jeff Sutherland's interview.
I'll give Klaus the first question of the day.
Oh, I'm honored. Thank you very much. And Jeff, thank you very much for taking your time to guide us. So here's the first question, and it is about the Scrum Master mandate. I've been working as a Scrum Master for 5 years, and what I have experienced is that the mandate of a Scrum Master might differ from company to company. The Scrum Guide doesn't mention anything about this mandate, but in case a team member is not performing and the other team members are not willing to speak about it in public, what is your take on any mandate that a Scrum Master might have in that situation to move him, or what are your thoughts on the mandate of the Scrum Master in that situation?
Well, first of all, Scrum is very effective at making visible the performance of everyone on the team. So I've worked with years with venture capital groups, and one of our companies in Australia we're working with, they booted up Scrum. At the end of the first sprint, we met with the product owner, the Scrum Master, and the manager, and they said, what we found is that two people on the team got nothing done. And we think they've got nothing done for the last year, but we couldn't see it when we were doing waterfall. But now that we see Scrum in the very first sprint, we know exactly who if gets anything done. And they said, what should we do? And I said, well, initially don't do anything, because the team, Scrum is set up so the team can take care of a lot of the problems. And so they waited a sprint. And then at the next sprint, they actually happened to be in Boston. We actually met face to face and we talked about what was going on. They said, well, at the end of the second sprint, one of the people was, working well with the team and contributing just like everybody else, but the other person still was doing nothing. And so we decided what to do. And the manager decided that he was going to go back and actually fire the person. So this is the kind of model that really works. The Scrum Master tries to get the team performing. It's going to be obvious where the problem is. Tries to get the team to help fix the problem by making it visible, having a reasonable discussion about it. Maybe personally coaching the person. But then if there's no traction on the part of the Scrum Master, there needs to be a person in a leadership position there. I was going to say manager, but at Scrum Week, we don't have managers, but we do have an enterprise action team, which will deal with this stuff. We do have Scrum Masters that will effectively work with someone on a Scrum team that is a real problem and figure out what to do. So the manager has to step in and figure out what to do. Do I move this person off the team? Do I move this person out of the company? Is there something else that this person could do that would be constructive rather than hurting the team's performance, right? And managers have to do that. That's my message to managers. You do not want to be having weekly meetings with your employees. That's over. You don't need to micromanage them. What you need to do is create a vision, make sure they're trained, make sure they're motivated, make sure they're happy. But if there's one person that's blocking team performance, then it's your responsibility as a manager to intervene. And if you don't, you will be like a soccer team manager who's going to be losing all the games. And you don't want to do that. You have to take responsibility for the team, for getting the right Scrum Master in place, the right product owner in place. Servant leadership, and being good to great, It's all about what is the one thing that makes CEOs of companies great, and great means their stock price goes up like 1,000 times. and the one thing that makes them great is servant leadership. And if you listen to these CEOs, what they will say is, our job is to get the right people on the bus, give them a vision of what we want to see, and then it's for them to figure out how we get to where we need to go. But there's a corollary of that. If you have the wrong person on the bus, then that servant leader has to move the wrong person off the bus. And the same thing is true of a Scrum Master. And because the Scrum Masters weren't doing this, Ken, in the last Scrum Guide, wanted to take servant leadership out of the Scrum Guide. He said, it's not working. The Scrum Masters aren't doing the job. They're not understanding the role. And the whole Agile community screamed, no, we have to have servant leadership. It took a year of arguing until we decided, okay, we're going to change the order of the terms. We're going to have a Scrum Master that's a leader who serves, so that we get the right way of working for the Scrum Masters to improve team performance, and then figure out what to do with the assistance of the leadership of the company if there are individual problems. Does that answer your question?
Partly, but I'll wait with further questions. Thank you, Jeff.
Very good. Okay, let's bounce from Europe to America. And a question that kind of dovetails on that one. Mark, you go next.
Hey, Jeff. Thanks for the taking the time. Really appreciate it. My question has to do with organizational structure. And so, as some organizations are oriented around their products and services, but others may still be a matrix organization or even see their IT as a separate entity. And this can create friction when the organization wants to make changes to the ways that they're delivering the product or service, and when they want to use the Scrum framework. So I was wondering, what recommendations do you have for organizations that are starting from an organizational model where they see the business and IT as separate entities? And how do you coach those organizations through the transition into Scrum?
Well, first of all, most of the organization we're working with are not IT companies. They have an IT group, but first thing we do with Scrum at Scale is say, okay, where in the organization do we want to prioritize first? And usually that's not IT. IT may be slow, but they're not the blocker for production and revenue in the market, right? So for example, our latest John Deere case study, which is public, it's on our website. It was written by John Deere. They had been doing SAFe for like 9 years, and they did get some improvement, but it wasn't enough. That wasn't what they needed. So they started implementing Scrum at Scale. And where do we start? They said, the thing that is blocking us right now is the system that delivers the tractors and the farm equipment to market. The order management system, the tracking of the orders, the purchasing people, the people managing the supply chains, that is where the block is. And by focusing there, we set up Scrums there, and that enabled them to implement improvements 10 times as fast and deliver 15 times more tractors, and made the stock price go up 300 to 400%. Okay, so how do we do that? We said, okay, in that piece of the company, we want teams that are fully agile. And we're going to have Scrum Masters and product owners. We're going to have sets of teams, scrums of scrums. We're going to have a Scrum team that's the leadership team, the enterprise action team. We're going to have a meta Scrum that's a forum where the product owner team meets with the senior management on a regular cadence and gets the senior management agreeing to support the agenda of the agile piece of the organization. And that means the senior manager is going to ride shotgun for any part of the organization that's slowing down delivery of tractors. And they're going to go out and shoot anybody that's getting in the way. So once that message gets through the organization, then that Scrum implementation and order management can really function, right? Because it's just totally Scrum. It's run by Agile leadership. That is a Scrum team. And senior management is doing the blocking and tackling outside the little Agile bubble, right? That's a way to start it. And then you want to expand that bubble. But in that Agile bubble, there are no departments. There may be something like, when Henrik Nieberg implemented the Spotify model, he created this idea of chapters, where the people that had historically been managers, like a QA manager would have a bunch of QA people that he would hire, that he would train, that he would motivate, but day to day they would be deployed to the teams, and he would have no day-to-day management responsibility. He would have responsibility to regularly bring them together and agree on, standards, tooling, to make sure there was a quality program throughout the organization. So the structure needs to be set up different. If you allow those department hierarchies to affect the Scrum structure, then you have what people call the hybrid Agile, right? Which always sucks. So, it's, from my point of view, it's not worth my time to fix hybrid Agile. It is worth my time to try to figure out how to get an Agile piece of the company that really works. So if they're trying to do that, I'll try to get a smaller and smaller piece until I can get one that's actually a cohesive Agile structure. We'll implement that. We'll get twice the work in half the time, and then we'll show that to management and say, do you want more of that, right? And more means we pull in more teams into this new structure. So most companies will continue to have old structures, but they need to be kept separate from the Agile bubble. And if you read Professor Carter's book, Accelerate, he says in that book, he has never seen a successful Agile transformation where waterfall management has been involved in managing the Agile bubble. That means if you allow that hybrid management structure, you will get 100% Agile transformation failure. We already know that worldwide, 53% of Agile transformations fail. And when they do fail, 67% of them will go bankrupt, or they're acquired, they're out of business. And so, once you know that, this company is in real trouble if they try to enforce any hybrid management structure. They're going to fail, and they're likely to go out of business. So you either want to fix that by starting small, or you want to get out of there and go to another company that's going to be successful, right? Because today things are happening so fast. And particularly the COVID situation made thousands of companies go bankrupt. Even some of the biggest companies in the United States went bankrupt because of COVID. They could not respond. They had those hybrid management structures that could not work remotely, could not prioritize and work with teams all over the world. They just went under. And I can tell you, looking at what's going on in the world, and the pace of change is accelerating, it's going to get even more demanding and even more risky for these old structures that try to maintain themselves, right?
Okay, very good. So back to Europe. Maiken, you are next.
You should hear me now. My question is different from the other ones because I always like the product owner. If you have a team level Scrum and you have a product owner that seriously failed, that is, he didn't have a prioritized backlog, it was not ready, then the outcome of the whole team would be, well, pretty much lowered because of him. So, but in a scale situation, what would the crucial part be in that case? Would it be the product ownership again? Would it be somewhere else? And it could probably be different on the short term and the long term, as it is on a team level, where I could see a different outcome on longer term than short term.
Well, I understand your comment. If you have a bad product owner, the team will fail.
Yeah, but what would the situation be on a scaled team? What would be the most crucial part not to fail?
If you have a chief product owner that doesn't know what she is doing, then the whole company's going to fail, right? So who's responsible for fixing that? The CEO, right?
Yeah.
So at Scrum Inc., we have multiple business units, and we booted up a new business unit this past year for online training. We already had online training, but we want to significantly focus it and expand it. We hired a product owner. It wasn't working. Within 3 months, I think the executive action team fired him. And we got a second product owner who was much better, but he was badly behaved and he wasn't treating people right. So this past month, he was fired summarily by the CEO. The CEO said he actually didn't fire him. The executive action team had already decided to fire him. But the CEO then called a company meeting and said, this second product owner has been fired today because of the way he was treating people. He wasn't living the Scrum values, and we're not going to tolerate that, all right? So agile leadership means they actually lead. They have a vision, they know where they're going, and they don't tolerate the wrong people in the wrong position, particularly product owners. They are the most critical for business success. Now, I used to spend time almost every month in Denmark for years, so I'm very familiar with the agile movement. Really got started in Denmark, Sweden, the Scandinavian companies in terms of Europe expansion of the agile framework. So, but one of the things I noticed about the Danes is they like to work by committee, and they don't like anybody to be able to make a decision which the product owner has to make. So every culture is different, but the Danish culture has the problem that they won't give the product owner the responsibility for ordering that backlog, for everyone following that backlog, and then the product owner is held accountable for success. So, I think I want to add that on to the answer to the question, because in your culture, you have to get a person that is competent, that can actually make the decision with the input of other people. But at the end of the day, that one person makes the decision, that's the product owner. And the other people follow that decision. And if the product owner fails, then that product owner is held accountable for that failure. Otherwise, things don't work. If you build stuff by a committee, instead of a horse, you get a camel, right?
Thank you so much for your time today, Jeff. So my question is that, in my opinion, the sprint review has been the most challenging of the Scrum events to do in a successful way. And I think partly that is it's hard to get time from the key stakeholders often, and it isn't often collaborative. It tends to fall into more that demo than the collaboration. So my question is, what have you done in the past to try to ensure that you have a more successful and sort of fully robust sprint review?
Well, I remember, this reminds me, I was in Ireland in around 1990. This was before the first Scrum team was formed, but they brought me in because Guinness Speed Aviation, who no longer exists, so I could talk about them, turned into Ryanair. But back then, it was the largest aircraft leasing company in the world. And they had hired, I think they had, when they brought me in, 67 consultants, top in their field from everywhere in the world, to take their whole IT, not just their IT, but the whole way they worked, which was largely driven by IT automation, into the future. And the mission of the CEO in every sprint review was like all singing and dancing. We have to wow the people. And he would not tolerate any boring sprint reviews. As a result, Guinness Pete ran into trouble. In the early 90s, there was a cutback in aviation worldwide. So the leasing companies got into trouble. And they had to cut back, and they cut all the way back to a team which I led that was building a system. They would buy 747s by the dozen. So, and every 747 had to be outfitted. And when it hit the assembly line, there were 100 different vendors that had to come in with the seats, the radios, the kitchen. And they had to come in at the right time. And our system managed all the contracts and created a visualization on the assembly line of these 747s moving the line. And it had some AI in it, managing the contracts. And it was a unbelievably cool system to the end users. So the reason we survived when everything else was cut back was the users were actually fantastically interested in this system. And every sprint review, they saw new features that just blew them away. And at the end of the day, they actually had to restructure the company because the business turned around, and they brought in a senior vice president from, I think from Accenture, who came in, and he met with me. He said, "Jeff, I have to fire your whole team, but the business will not let this application go. So we have to have a team that actually will maintain this in the future." And he said, this project is one of the best projects we've ever seen. Even though we're going to fire you, we're going to have a really huge party at one of the best Irish pubs and celebrate the success of this project. So anyway, that's a long story to say, if your Scrum reviews are boring, nobody's going to come.
All right, that's a fair point.
It's all about the show, right? You have to put a good show in there. Okay, so now we go back to Europe, or at least as much as the Brits don't like to say they're in Europe. So Joanne, you go next.
Was there a additional value that you were torn between, or were you set with the openness, courage, respect?
Focus came from I think it was chapter 7 in the first Scrum book that was written by Ken Schwaber and Mike Beadle. I actually just a contribution, but Ken was observing a company where I was chief technology officer called Patient Keeper. And he was trying to figure out, why did Scrum work so well? Because it was still one of the fastest sets of teams I've ever seen. These guys could install a new hospital system in major hospitals multiple times a sprint. I've never seen anybody be able to do that. I don't even think Google can do it. But they would do it every month for years, at least for brand new hospitals like Mass General in Boston or Johns Hopkins, one of the biggest hospitals in the United States. And Ken wanted to know, why did that work? And he said it's really because he thought because of the value system that was set up. And then he came up with the 5 values in that book. And then as we went through Scrum Guide iterations, it was about the 5th iteration of the Scrum Guide where a lot of the Scrum community had prioritized getting the values into the Scrum Guide. And so then they went into the Scrum Guide exactly as they were in the book. Now, the way I think of them, the values are all about generating better performance of teams and organizations. Because one of the things about people in the organization, sometimes developers have trouble understanding this, that they're only going to be happy, they're only going to be paid, they're only going to be promoted if the organization is successful. So to make the organization successful, the first thing you need to have is open information. Because if you don't have open and clear information, people will make the wrong decisions, and that will undermine the value of the organization, okay? So to get all the data on the table, people will not speak up. First of all, you have to have everybody able to speak. And people will not speak up unless you respect them and you listen to them and you treat them as equals. A good example of this was at Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston. We were asked to come in and help with surgery because the speed of surgery and the number of surgeries they can do in a day in a hospital is dependent on how fast you can clean the room and set it up for the next surgery. And for decades, it's taken them an hour or more to turn that room around. And no matter what they tried to do, they couldn't shorten it. So they brought us in to implement Scrum. We implemented Scrum at scale for, initially we started small with 3 surgery units. And the Scrum team was the chief surgeon, the head nurse, it was Scrum master, the other staff that was assisting with the surgery, and the cleaning people that were turning around the room. And the first thing we noticed is the head surgeon is treating the cleaning people like dirt, right? No respect. And we told the chief surgeon, you are never going to shorten the turnaround time unless the cleaning people figure out what to do and you support them. So in the Scrum meetings, you need to treat them as equal and they need to speak as much as you do. And once he understood that, within 2 weeks, we cut the turnaround time to 30 minutes. Surgery is half of the business of a hospital. And Brigham and Women's is a $7 billion operation. And by cutting it in half, we increased surgery by 20%. That's $700 million direct to the bottom line, along with reduced cost for surgery. It's an unbelievable amount of free money, right? So these things have huge implications. And it requires the chief surgeon to treat the lowest person cleaning the room as a real person who is an equal in making that surgery successful, okay? So respect. To get the data on the table, though, it needs more than respect. The people need to have the courage to speak up. You know, I can't tell you how many Scrum Masters and even more senior people have told me, you know, Jeff, if I tell the truth, I could get fired. And then they have to make a decision. Are you just going to be another ineffective person? I found that in the US military. A general said to me, you know, I said, I know Scrum can solve your problem and here's how it can solve it. And the general said, you're right. And I said, well, why don't you implement Scrum at scale? And she said, I'd have to fire most of my commanders. And I said, well, you need to decide whether you're just going to be an administrator, filling a seat, you know, making no waves, trying to get promoted in 3 years when you're gone, or you're actually going to be a leader and do what generals are born to do. You have to decide. So courage comes in many ways, both at the top and at the team level and for the cleaners in the hospital. So once you get that openness, respect, and courage, things come into focus. And it becomes clear to everybody what needs to be done next. And when you have that focus and then everybody agrees, then you get the commitment. And once you get real commitment, there's a great poem by a mountain climber about commitment. Once you commit, amazing things happen. The universe moves to try to assist you in totally unexpected ways. And you achieve fantastic things that you thought were impossible. So you're asking me what I would add to that. There might be something, but that's such a good set all by itself. You know, I think the things that really need to be put around that are the things that create the right behaviors so that people don't block those values. And as I mentioned earlier at Scrum Inc., we fire people who violate the values. We don't tolerate if it's bad performance, we'll try to work with the person. But if it's a really bad violation of values, they're gone. We can't tolerate that.
This was part one of the interview with Dr. Jeff Sutherland. I hope you guys liked it.
I certainly did. It was a great episode. And guys, just make sure you hit the subscribe button on whatever platform you use to follow podcasts to not miss the second part of this very exciting interview. And of course, many more episodes with Q and me that will follow afterwards. Take care, guys.